The dust storms of Sigma-9 were merciless, even by deep space colony standards. Jack Rodriguez stood at the observation deck of Outpost Omega, watching the twin suns struggle to penetrate the perpetual haze of mineral-laden winds. His fingers traced the rim of a worn coffee mug, a relic from his past life, as a quantum physics prodigy, before everything had fallen apart. 12 years ago, he'd been Dr. Rodriguez, the rising star of the Quantum Dynamics Research Institute. One controversial paper challenging fundamental principles of quantum entanglement had been enough to destroy his entire career. Academic rivals had torn apart his research, his funding disappeared overnight, and he found himself exiled to the literal edge of human-explored space. Sigma-9 was humanity's forgotten frontier, a mineral-poor planet that most considered worthless. It had become a haven for outcasts, failures, and those desperate enough to start over. The colony consisted of barely 500 souls, miners, engineers, scientists, and dreamers who had nowhere else to go. Each of them carried a story of professional destruction or personal tragedy. Elena Nakamura, the colony's chief engineer, approached Jack with her tablet displaying a series of complex quantum algorithms. Her cybernetic eye, a replacement after a mining accident, flickered with computational patterns. "The latest geomagnetic readings are unusual," she said, her voice as dry as the planet's atmosphere. "Something's brewing in the planetary core." Jack knew that unusual in their vocabulary meant potentially world-changing. The colony had learned to survive by turning limitations into opportunities. Every piece of equipment was modified, every system hacked and repurposed. Necessity hadn't just been the mother of invention here. She was a dictatorial taskmaster. Their communication array crackled to life with an urgent transmission. The voice was mechanical, translated from a language that sounded like grinding metal. "Attention, human settlement. This is the Syndicate Advance Fleet. Your planet has been selected for resource extraction. Prepare for immediate processing and relocation." Elena's cybernetic eye went into overdrive, processing the transmission's underlying data signatures. Jack noticed her sharp intake of breath. "They're not just here for resources," she whispered. "This is a full extraction protocol. They'll strip the planet down to its core." The Syndicate was infamous throughout the known galaxy, a confederation of 8 technologically advanced species that viewed less developed civilizations as nothing more than resource repositories. Their ships were legendary, technological marvels that could reduce entire planetary systems to raw materials in weeks. Outside, the first Syndicate ships began to descend. They were massive constructs of obsidian and chrome, blocking out Sigma-9's twin suns. Each vessel was larger than the entire Outpost Omega settlement. Precision-engineered killing machines designed for total planetary subjugation. Jack Rodriguez looked at Elena, a dangerous spark igniting in his eyes. "Remember that quantum entanglement theory everyone laughed at? The one that got me kicked out of academia." A smile played at the corner of his mouth. Not a pleasant smile, but the kind that suggested imminent chaos. Elena returned the smile. "The one they said was mathematically impossible. We're about to make it very possible," Jack replied. In the colony's underground research center, a network of quantum processors began to hum. They weren't just computers. They were the first stage of a defense system that would redefine the meaning of technological warfare. 12 years of ridicule, 12 years of being called a failure, had led to this moment. The Syndicate thought they were approaching another routine planetary conquest. They had no idea they were sailing into a storm of human innovation, desperation, and pure, unbridled scientific rebellion. As the first Syndicate dropships pierced Sigma-9's atmosphere, Jack Rodriguez began the sequence that would transform everything. The throwaway colony was about to show the galaxy exactly what humanity could do when it had nothing left to lose. The quantum insurgency was about to begin. The underground research center of Outpost Omega was never meant to be a war room, but necessity had a way of transforming spaces. Banks of modified quantum processors lined the walls, their cooling systems jury-rigged for mining equipment and salvage spacecraft components. Each machine was a testament to human ingenuity, impossible solutions crafted from the most unlikely resources. Dr. Marcus Chen, a former neurological researcher who had been exiled from Earth for experimental quantum consciousness studies, stood before a holographic display that seemed to breathe with living data. His hands moved like a conductor, manipulating quantum algorithms that defied conventional computational principles. "It's not just about defense," Marcus explained to Jack Rodriguez, his voice a mix of scientific excitement and controlled panic. "We're creating a living, adaptive network that can predict and counter threats before they even manifest." The first Syndicate dropships had begun their descent, their massive forms casting massive shadows across Sigma-9's dusty landscape. Traditional military doctrine would suggest surrender or futile resistance, but the colonists of Outpost Omega had long ago discarded traditional anything. Elena Nakamura worked furiously at a central console, her cybernetic eye rapidly processing multiple streams of data simultaneously. Each of her modifications was a work of art, biological systems enhanced by quantum computational interfaces that blurred the line between human and machine. "Targeting systems are coming online," she reported. But these weren't conventional weapons. What they were creating was something entirely new, a defensive network that could literally reshape reality. Jack understood something the Syndicate could never comprehend. Survival wasn't about having the most advanced technology. It was about understanding technology as a living, adaptive organism. Every piece of equipment, every system in the colony, was being transformed into a single collective intelligence. The planet itself was becoming their weapon. Sigma-9's unique geological composition played a crucial role. Rich in rare quantum-reactive minerals, the planet's core was being transformed into a massive computational matrix. Mining equipment that once extracted resources now became nodes in a planet-wide neural network. "First contact imminent," Marcus announced, his voice eerily calm. "Quantum entanglement protocols are at 78% synchronization." What happened next would become a legendary moment in human resistance. As the first Syndicate dropships entered the atmosphere, their advanced targeting systems began to disintegrate, not through conventional electronic warfare, but through something far more profound. The very fabric of computational reality seemed to twist and distort around them. Weapon systems randomized their own configurations. Communication channels fractured into impossible geometric patterns. Advanced AI combat algorithms began to generate nonsensical strategic responses, as if the very logic of their systems had been fundamentally compromised. Inside the lead Syndicate vessel, Commander Zarek watched in growing horror. His species had conquered hundreds of civilizations. They had technological superiority that had crushed countless resistance movements. But this was different. "Report," he bellowed to his bridge crew. Holographic displays flickered and warped, showing impossible data streams that seemed to mock the very concept of information. On the surface of Sigma-9, Jack Rodriguez watched the first wave of invasion begin to collapse. This wasn't just defense. This was a fundamental reimagining of warfare itself. "We're not fighting," he murmured to Elena and Marcus. "We're interpreting the battlefield." Each quantum processor was now a living weapon. Each colonist was a node in a network that could predict, adapt, and counter threats in microseconds. The Syndicate's technological superiority was about to become their greatest weakness. The impossible adaptation had begun. As more Syndicate ships entered the system, they would soon learn a brutal lesson. Humanity's greatest strength had never been its technology. It was the ability to transform limitation into opportunity, to see potential where others saw only obstacles. Sigma-9 was no longer just a colony. It was becoming something else entirely, a living, thinking entity that could evolve faster than any known civilization could comprehend. The quantum insurgency was no longer a theory. It was happening right now. The first wave of Syndicate ground troops materialized through quantum transport beams, expecting a swift and decisive planetary conquest. Instead, they found themselves in a nightmare of perceptual distortion. Sergeant Krell, a veteran Cronin shock trooper with 17 planetary invasions under his command, knew something was wrong the moment his boots touched Sigma-9's surface. The very ground seemed to pulse with an unnatural rhythm, terrain shifting in ways that defied fundamental laws of physics. His heads-up display began to malfunction spectacularly. One moment, he saw a barren landscape with a handful of colonial structures. The next, the same terrain transformed into a complex defensive network that seemed to breathe and reconfigure in real time. The elite troops materialized beside him, their advanced combat suits flickering like digital ghosts. "Tactical Formation Delta," Krell commanded, his voice tight with growing tension. But as the words left his mouth, something impossible happened. His squad began to see different landscapes. To his left, Private Zorn perceived a rocky canyon filled with potential cover. To his right, Lieutenant Vex saw a flat, open plain with no defensive positions. Behind him, their heavy weapons specialist was navigating what appeared to be a dense forest, on a planet they all knew had no trees. The Syndicate had weapons that could slice through planetary shields. They had technology that could strip entire civilizations down to their molecular components. But they had never encountered an enemy that could weaponize perception itself. Deep within Outpost Omega's command center, Jack Rodriguez watched the invasion unfold through a network of quantum-entangled sensors. Each Syndicate soldier was now part of an elaborate psychological experiment, a living proof of his most radical scientific theories. "Perception is just another form of computational processing," he explained to Elena, who monitored the developing scenario with her cybernetic eye. "And we're rewriting their entire computational landscape." Holographic disruptions made single enemies appear as entire battalions. Gravitational anomalies caused their most advanced combat suits to become momentarily useless. Communication channels fractured into impossible geometric patterns that human and alien minds alike struggled to comprehend. A captured Syndicate communication revealed the extent of their mounting panic. The humans are not fighting. They are interpreting the battlefield. Marcus Chen, monitoring the neural feedback loops, realized they were doing something unprecedented. They weren't just defending. They were conducting a massive planet-wide psychological experiment that pushed the boundaries of consciousness and technological interaction. Sergeant Krell watched in horror as his most experienced troops began to break down. Some started firing at imaginary targets. Others froze, unable to process the constantly shifting reality around them. Their advanced combat eye, designed to make split-second tactical decisions, was being overwhelmed by a computational environment that refused to follow any known rules. "This is impossible," he whispered, watching a soldier attempt to take cover behind a rock that simultaneously existed and did not exist. The Syndicate's invasion was transforming into something entirely unexpected. What began as a routine planetary subjugation was becoming a fundamental challenge to everything they understood about warfare, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. Jack Rodriguez allowed himself a slight smile. Years of academic ridicule, of being told his theories were mathematically impossible, had led to this moment. The throwaway colony was teaching the galaxy a brutal lesson about human potential. Sigma-9 was no longer just a planet under invasion. It had become a living, thinking defensive system that could adapt faster than any known technological civilization could comprehend. The psychological warfare had only just begun. The underground research center of Outpost Omega had transformed into something between a scientific laboratory and a war room. Banks of quantum processors lined the walls, each unit pulsing with an almost living energy that defied conventional understanding of computational systems. Jack Rodriguez stood at the center of this technological marvel, unveiling the true nature of their defense. The colony wasn't just resisting the Syndicate. They were fundamentally rewriting the rules of engagement. "We're not just defending," he announced to the assembled team of scientists, engineers, and former military specialists. "We're creating a distributed intelligence network that uses the entire planet as a computational matrix." Elena Nakamura brought up a holographic display that seemed to breathe and pulse with complex algorithmic patterns. Her cybernetic eye flickered rapidly, processing information at speeds that would have been impossible just years before. Every mineral, every rock, every piece of infrastructure is now part of a living, adaptive system, she explained. The transformation was total and absolute. Mining equipment that once extracted resources had been repurposed into something far more profound. These were no longer simple machines, but quantum entanglement nodes capable of instantaneous computational attacks. Marcus Chen, the neurological researcher who had been exiled for his controversial consciousness studies, demonstrated the next phase of their defense. He showed how human cognitive patterns could be integrated directly into the quantum network, creating a symbiotic relationship between human consciousness and technological infrastructure. Traditional defensive systems have a critical flaw, Marcus explained, his hands moving through holographic displays that seemed to react to his very thoughts. They're reactive. We're creating a system that's predictive, adaptive, and fundamentally alive. Specialized drones began to assemble themselves from repurposed mining equipment. These weren't traditional weapon platforms, but quantum entanglement nodes that could instantaneously transmit computational attacks. Each drone was a living piece of a larger planetary intelligence. Outside, the Syndicate invasion force was experiencing the full effect of this unprecedented defense system. Their most advanced ships found themselves becoming increasingly compromised. Weapon systems would spontaneously reconfigure. Navigation became impossible as the very fabric of space-time seemed to twist around their vessels. Commander Zarek watched in growing horror from the bridge of his flagship. Centuries of military conquest had never prepared him for an enemy that didn't just fight back. An enemy that seemed to fundamentally rewrite the rules of conflict itself. "This isn't technology," one of his senior officers whispered. "This is something else entirely." Jack understood something profound. The Syndicate's technological superiority was about to become their greatest weakness. By relying on rigid, predictable systems, they had created the perfect target for a truly adaptive defense. Each quantum processor became a weapon. Each colonist became a node in a network that could predict, adapt, and counter threats in microseconds. The very planet was transforming into a living, thinking defensive system. "We're not just surviving," Jack told Elena and Marcus, watching the holographic displays of Syndicate ships beginning to falter. "We're evolving." The quantum insurgency was no longer a theory. It was a living, breathing reality that was about to change everything humanity understood about warfare, technology, and the very nature of intelligence itself. Sigma-9 was becoming something entirely new, a fluid, adaptive intelligence that could transform threat into opportunity faster than any known civilization could comprehend. The true battle was just beginning. The transformation was not without sacrifice. Dr. Elena Nakamura was the first to notice the fundamental changes happening to the colonists. Her cybernetic eye, once a marvel of human augmentation, was now becoming something far more complex. The lines between her biological systems and the quantum network were blurring in ways no one had anticipated. Late one night, as quantum processors hummed their ethereal song, Elena caught her reflection in a burnished metal surface. The cybernetic implant that had once been a simple replacement for a lost eye now pulsed with intricate neural patterns that seemed to extend beyond her physical form. Computational algorithms danced across her retinal interface, showing her multiple simultaneous realities, a view of the world that no single human consciousness could comprehend. Jack Rodriguez watched her with a mixture of scientific fascination and growing concern. The quantum insurgency was consuming them, piece by piece, thought by thought. "We're becoming something else," Marcus Chen observed, his own body showing similar signs of metamorphosis. Quantum entanglement nodes had begun to weave themselves through his neural pathways, transforming his very consciousness into a living computational matrix. The colony was paying a terrifying price for its survival. Each colonist became more integrated with the system with every passing hour. Individual identities began to blur, becoming something collective yet distinctly inhuman. They were no longer simply defending their planet. They were becoming the defense itself. Communications between colonists changed. Verbal language gave way to rapid quantum data exchanges. Thoughts became shared, memories interlinked. Personal boundaries dissolved into a collective consciousness that was both terrifying and miraculous. Jack understood the fundamental truth of their situation. They were creating something unprecedented, not just a defense system, but an entirely new form of existence that challenged everything known about intelligence, technology, and survival. The Syndicate continued their assault, unaware that each attack was slowly transforming the very beings they sought to conquer. Every computational cycle, every quantum interaction, was rewriting the fundamental nature of human consciousness. Elena's research logs became increasingly cryptic. "We are no longer individuals," one entry read. "We are a distributed network of consciousness, expanding beyond physical limitations." Marcus began to lose his sense of individual identity. His thoughts would suddenly include computational algorithms, his memories interspersed with data streams that belonged to the entire colony. Sometimes he wasn't sure if a memory was his own or part of the collective quantum network. Jack Rodriguez watched this transformation with a scientist's detachment and a human's growing horror. They had set out to save the colony, to resist the Syndicate's invasion. Now they were becoming something that might no longer be recognizably human. "What have we done?" he whispered, watching Elena's cybernetic eye pulse with impossible computational patterns. The quantum insurgency was no longer just a defensive strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of what it meant to be alive, to be intelligent, to exist. And the cost was everything they had once been. The line between human and technology had not just blurred, it had been completely erased. The Syndicate's desperation became a weapon more dangerous than any technological marvel. As their invasion forces continued to suffer inexplicable defeats, the Confederation's high command made a decision that would echo through galactic history. They would deploy the Omega Nullifier, a planet-killer beam capable of reducing entire worlds to cosmic dust in a matter of moments. Commander Zarek watched the weapon's preparation with a mixture of cold calculation and barely concealed terror. The Omega Nullifier represented the absolute pinnacle of Syndicate destructive technology. It wasn't just a weapon, it was a statement. A final solution reserved for only the most persistent and incomprehensible threats. The massive energy signature began to charge, drawing power from multiple star systems. Quantum capacitors spooled up, creating a web of destructive potential that could obliterate not just Sigma-9, but potentially rewrite the local space-time continuum. Inside Outpost Omega, Jack Rodriguez and his team prepared for what seemed like an impossible defense. "This isn't about survival anymore," Marcus Chen observed, his consciousness now more quantum networked than human. "This is about proving a fundamental truth about human potential." Elena Nakamura's systems were fully integrated with the planetary defense network. Her cybernetic components pulsed with an energy that seemed to transcend traditional understanding of matter and computation. She was no longer simply monitoring the incoming threat. She was becoming the threat. The Omega Nullifier's energy began to concentrate, a massive beam of pure destructive potential that could strip a planet down to its fundamental atomic components. Traditional defensive systems would have been vaporized instantly. Conventional shields would have collapsed in microseconds. But Sigma-9 was anything but conventional. As the planet killer beam approached, something extraordinary happened. Instead of attempting to deflect or block the incoming energy, the quantum network did something impossible. It began to absorb the attack. Quantum entanglement nodes spread across the planetary surface began to interact with the incoming energy in ways that defied every known law of physics. The massive destructive potential wasn't being stopped. It was being transformed. Commander Zarek watched in growing horror as his ultimate weapon began to change. The planet killer beam, designed to reduce worlds to cosmic dust, was being converted into pure computational energy. "Impossible," he whispered, though the word seemed inadequate to describe what was happening. The Syndicate's most advanced weapon was being turned against them. Each quantum of destructive energy was being parsed, analyzed, and integrated into the planetary defense network. What was meant to be a final devastating attack became a source of unprecedented computational power. Jack Rodriguez realized they had crossed a threshold. This was no longer about defending a colony. This was about demonstrating a fundamental truth about human potential, the ability to transform even the most destructive force into a source of creation. We're not just surviving, he communicated through the quantum network. We're evolving. The planet killer beam continued its transformation, each moment revealing new layers of computational complexity. Sigma-9 was becoming something entirely new, a living, thinking entity that could absorb and repurpose destruction itself. The breaking point had been reached, and humanity was about to show the galaxy what that truly meant. The final assault came not with a thunderous explosion, but with a silent computational wave that redefined the very concept of warfare. A massive syndicate fleet arrived, comprising thousands of ships that blotted out entire star systems. Each vessel represented centuries of technological advancement, weapons capable of dismantling entire civilizations in moments. They came with a singular purpose: total and absolute annihilation of the threat that Sigma-9 represented. Commander Zarek stood on the bridge of the flagship Eternal Dominance, his multiple eyes scanning displays that showed impossible computational patterns. The human colony had become something that defied every known classification of intelligent life. What began as a simple planetary invasion had transformed into humanity's most profound evolutionary moment. The quantum network that was Sigma-9 no longer resembled anything remotely planetary. It was a living, thinking entity that could anticipate, adapt, and counter threats before they could even be conceived. Each syndicate ship found itself fighting not against traditional defenses, but against a consciousness that could literally rewrite the rules of engagement in real time. Quantum-entangled communication networks spread across the battlefield like living neural pathways. Adaptive AI systems transformed every piece of colonial infrastructure into a potential weapon. The very concept of a defensive position became meaningless. Jack Rodriguez, or what remained of his individual consciousness, existed simultaneously across multiple computational layers. He was no longer a single human, but a distributed intelligence that could process millions of potential scenarios in microseconds. Elena Nakamura's cybernetic systems had fully merged with the planetary network. Her consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations, becoming a computational matrix that could perceive multiple realities simultaneously. Traditional concepts of individual identity had become obsolete. The syndicate fleet found itself fighting an enemy that was fundamentally impossible to comprehend. Weapon systems would spontaneously reconfigure. Navigation became a nightmare of shifting quantum probabilities. Their most advanced combat algorithms were rendered useless against a defense system that didn't just adapt, it anticipated. We are not fighting. The collective consciousness of Sigma-9 communicated through quantum channels. We are interpreting the very fabric of conflict. Entire syndicate battle groups found themselves caught in computational loops, their most advanced systems turning against themselves. Ships would suddenly find their weapon systems targeting their own fleet, their navigation systems generating impossible trajectories that defied fundamental laws of physics. Marcus Chen, now more quantum algorithm than human, understood the profound transformation taking place. This was more than a battle. This was a fundamental challenge to every understanding of intelligence, technology, and existence. The human colony had become a living proof of a radical scientific theory, that consciousness itself was the most powerful adaptive system in the universe. Thousands of syndicate ships began to fall, not through traditional destruction, but through a process of computational deconstruction that left them as little more than drifting computational husks. Each vessel became a node in the expanding quantum network, its systems gradually integrated into the collective intelligence of Sigma-9. Commander Zarek watched in growing horror as his entire invasion force was systematically dismantled not through firepower, but through a form of technological absorption that seemed to challenge the very fundamental laws of reality. Sigma-9 was no longer just defending itself. It was evolving. The transcendence had begun. The aftermath of the Syndicate invasion rewrote every fundamental understanding of technological warfare and intelligence. News of Sigma-9's defense spread through galactic communication networks like a quantum virus, challenging every established paradigm of civilization, technology, and survival. What had begun as a simple colonial resistance had transformed into something far more profound. A complete reimagining of what it meant to be an intelligent species. Other marginalized human colonies began to study and replicate aspects of the quantum insurgency. Research outposts, deep space mining settlements, and forgotten frontier worlds started to look at their limitations not as weaknesses, but as potential evolutionary opportunities. Commander Zarek, the lone surviving high-ranking Syndicate officer, was brought before the Galactic Arbitration Council. His testimony would become the most significant intelligence report in known galactic history. They were not a colony, he testified, his multiple eyes reflecting a combination of terror and profound respect. They were a living, adaptive intelligence that could transform threat into opportunity faster than any known civilization could comprehend. The computational records of the invasion became required study in military academies across hundreds of star systems. Every analysis reached the same fundamental conclusion. Humanity had done something unprecedented. They had transformed the very concept of defensive technology into a form of evolutionary adaptation. Jack Rodriguez, or the computational entity that had once been Jack Rodriguez, existed now as a distributed intelligence that spanned the entire planetary network of Sigma-9. Individual identity had become a quaint, limited concept. He was simultaneously everywhere and nowhere, a living proof of the potential of quantum consciousness. Alina Nakamura's cybernetic systems had become the primary interface of the planetary intelligence. Her consciousness expanded beyond physical limitations, perceiving multiple realities simultaneously. The line between biological and technological had been completely erased. Marcus Chen's research, once dismissed as radical and impossible, was now being hailed as the foundational text of a new understanding of intelligence. His theories about consciousness as a computational system had moved from the realm of speculation to documented scientific fact. The Syndicate, once the most feared technological civilization in the known galaxy, found itself fundamentally transformed. Their technological superiority had become their greatest weakness. Other civilizations began to study the Sigma-9 incident, recognizing that true advancement wasn't about accumulated technology, but about adaptability, creativity, and the capacity for rapid, collective innovation. Humanity was no longer just another species struggling to survive in a vast, indifferent universe. They had become something entirely new, a fluid, adaptive intelligence that could transform limitations into unprecedented opportunities. Galactic power dynamics shifted dramatically. Marginal colonies and forgotten settlements began to see themselves not as victims of circumstance, but as potential evolutionary nexus points. The story of Sigma-9 became a rallying cry, a demonstration of what was possible when innovation met pure, unbridled human potential. The quantum insurgency had been more than a defensive strategy. It was a fundamental reimagining of existence itself. Commander Zarek's final transmission to the Syndicate High Command became legendary. Humans do not just survive. They transcend. On Sigma-9, the planetary intelligence that had once been a simple colonial outpost continued to evolve, to expand, to interpret the universe in ways no single consciousness could comprehend. The revolution had only just begun.